consulting profession, what consultants do, let's spend a moment analyzing really the consultants. And there are many kinds of consultants to begin with. There are consultants that we can call partners. Those are the consultants that partner up with a client and that help the client in whatever problem he has. Other consultants are more experts. They have a very specialized knowledge in something that the client lacks. So the client needs them to provide them that very specific knowledge. And then there's another type of consultants which are more like another arm for the client. So it's more like adding to the headcount, adding to the workforce. So if you as a client don't have enough resources and you don't need more resources on a permanent base, then you call some consultants to enlarge your team for a moment while you implement a project, and then after that you get back to the normal. And consultants work with different models. So one model of working is what McKinsey, BCG, and Bain follow. It's more the solution. They come there and they provide you an overall solution to whatever problem you have. But there are other models as well. One is to be focused on processes, so improving the process inside an organization. So this is, for example, technology implementation. What Accenture does. It's helping your technology get better, more efficient. And then another type of business model is the network. So that's something that has started coming up over the last couple of years with more and more strength. So those are basically freelancing platforms where consultants with experience, they go to the platform and then the platform charges a fee every time they get hired by a client. What we're talking about here is, of course, the first type of consultants, the partners, that work on the model of being a solution provider. That's where McKinsey, BCG, and Bain are. Now, recently, there has been a wave of experts adding into the partners. Because the partners, what do they bring? They bring the judgment. They bring also expertise from different clients that they served. But the deep insights about an industry, about a function, come from experts. From those people who have been 10, 15, 20 years seeing that industry evolve. And the combination of the two is the model that McKinsey, BCG, and Bain are following increasingly. The ones focusing on process typically use experts, and those are most of the time very manpower intensive things, like installing an SAP software, whatever. And then the arms are typically associated more with these network platforms. So why do companies need consultants? Well, they need the skills and knowledge that the consultants bring. The consultants bring a team that is going to be going after the facts, analyzing them. They're going to bring a leadership with partners that have been around the world and seen many different situations. And they're also going to bring all the firm resources, all the proprietary databases, all the frameworks, tools, and expert networks. And on the other hand, the client, if the client wants to change something, he needs support. It's sometimes hard to get the board to approve a big change if you don't have the stamp that this is something meaningful. Or sometimes it's hard to get the buy-in from other executives. Sometimes it may be hard to get the employees. In many companies that I have worked for, those were big constraints into what a management can do. Sometimes the other executives, other vice presidents, for example, would be fighting each other. I was in one company where one of the vice presidents that hired McKinsey for the project was trying to make us condemn another vice president. The vice president of strategy was fighting the vice president of operations because the strategy vice president wanted his place. And then you are in this game where they try to feed you data, biased data, and they want you to tell the CEO how badly he has performed. So of course that as a consultant, you bring some legitimization because you bring an independent view and the CEO trusts you that you have that independent view. So the CEO would ask me, Philippe, what is your impression having dealt with these people? What are you observing? And I would tell them my honest opinion based on facts, not based on the internal politics of the company. And of course, another important aspect is the employees. In one of the companies that I've worked for, the employees were motivated, were skilled in the headquarters. Everything was working fine. But as soon as I started going to other subsidiaries, the reality changed completely. People didn't know what was the strategy. People didn't feel united in a same culture. People felt abandoned. And when I was interviewing those people, those things became very worrying for me. And of course, when I went to the CEO, he was surprised, because his direct managers would not report those things to him. But the kind of things that I saw on the field that were shocking, in terms of not following procedures, in terms of very, very bad professionalism, those things were eye-opening for the CEO. So as a consultant, you can be someone that the client trusts for the independent view, and it is going to bring legitimacy to change. Now, the real change happens when the consultants are involved not only with the classical things of solving the problem, defining it, recommending the action, but when they actually step to the next level. And that next level is when they work side by side with the client in implementing. So McKinsey, for example, recently has started the implementation units. So those are people that come to a project when the generalists leave it. So the generalists leave here when they recommended the action. And then the implementation team comes to make sure that things are implemented. Because otherwise you may hand in a beautiful deck full of very nice recommendations, but then nothing happens. So the implementation is more and more a demand of clients. Okay, this is very nice, but now do it. Help me do it. Not only that, a lot of clients want to also develop their own capabilities so that they are not all the time dependent on the consultants. So help me learn how you solve problems. Help me learn how you communicate. Help me learn how you think strategically. In one of the projects that I did, we were focusing on improving the efficiency, the operational efficiency of an oil and gas company. But we realized that maybe even more important than that was really giving them tools so that they would be able to better manage their projects. It was impossible to know what is the state of that drilling project. They were completely lost. So we started developing their skills, training them with new tools of managing projects, training them in new tools of negotiating contracts, training with new tools of solving problems, of managing risk. And after a few months, we created a team, a project management team, that was taking charge of that. So that is developing capabilities. Another example was when my team was called in to help create a new department. And the client didn't have a clue on how to do that. It was a department to do customer lifecycle management for a telecom company. So they needed to launch these campaigns that you receive on your mobile phone. But they had no clue how to do it. What are the capabilities? What are the systems that you need? So we went there, and our delivery was a fully functioned team. A team that was completely autonomous. And finally, a very important thing is also helping the client change the mindsets and behaviors, which is probably the toughest thing to do. Because a lot of companies that we as consultants go to, they have something called change fatigue. They are so tired of every time a new manager comes, we're going to change, this is going to be completely different, transformational change, and it's program after program and nothing happens. So it is more and more important that whenever you are solving a problem for a client, you're also able to go beyond solving the problem and conquering people, moving them, inspiring them to act. And how do you do that? A lot of the times you do that by role modeling, by you yourself showing them how things can be done. Now, sometimes you do all this and you end up creating a dependency in your client. I had situations where we as consultants would do so much for the clients that they would not be able to do it themselves. So, for example, a huge bank that I worked with, we were transforming the entire organization, the way from the way they were assessing credit risk to the way they were really rewarding performance of the employees. We were basically covering everything. And it ended up that the client started putting more and more things for us, to the point that the organizational department that was in charge of this whole thing, well, when the time came to present to the CEO, it was me presenting to him because the client didn't feel comfortable and wise enough to do it. It shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case, because when you do the job that your clients should be doing, you are falling into the locomotive effect. And what is the locomotive effect? That is an effect that when you start a project, it's very easy to start projects, especially when times are good. Clients have money, they have budget, so they hire the consultants. But then the consultants get ever more and more installed in the company and they start doing more and more things, and at the end the client cannot live without them. Sometimes it happened in one of my projects that the whole McKinsey team was there for longer than the management team. So there was a lot of change going in the organization. One management team had left, the new management team had come. And we thought, well, now we have to conquer again the management team. Well, it's not true. They needed us because we've been there since the beginning, so we knew everything. So they couldn't live without us. And we ended up even doing things that we should not have been done. The management should be doing. So sometimes it's a bit like, if you have a hungry man, you should teach him how to fish rather than giving him a fish. Sometimes we end up giving too much fish, and then they keep being hungry. Whereas we should do more like teaching him how to fish, and then how to build a fishing empire. How do you spot a consultant? If a consultant is going down the road and you look in the window, how do you say, this looks like a consultant? First thing is that they are very nicely dressed. So a lot of you here would look like consultants. Now, what's really inside the minds of consultants? And an interesting thing is that the minds of consultants become very similar. It's scary. When you are having a problem-solving session and you're calling a colleague that is on the other side of the world in Hong Kong, and you find out, whoa, this guy has thought about the same things that I was thinking about. It gets scary. It's sometimes strange that there's so much similarity. It's almost like if we were brainwashed. But the reality is that we follow a very similar approach and principles. So one of the things, let's speak about the approach. One of the key elements is that it's fact-based. Consultants love facts. What is the data telling us? Because facts you cannot counter. It's not like an opinion. A fact is a fact. And the way you extract insights from the data gets pretty standardized at the firm. You have a lot of training to develop that approach. Another thing is that you're super structured as a consultant. So if you ask a consultant, what is your takeaway from the meeting? He said, oh, my takeaway is 3 things, 1, 2, 3. Super structured, sometimes even too much. Another feature is that they are very hypothesis driven, and this is something very useful. So when you are attacking a problem, it's very useful to have a hypothesis. So what does my intuition tell? Not about the whole thing, but what does my intuition tell on a part of that problem? And then you go and you validate that hypothesis. Maybe you're right, but sometimes you're wrong. Then you change. And then finally, another feature is the top management approach. So when you face a problem in a company, you don't look at it in isolation. You look at it as, what would the CEO think about this problem? What are the relationships with other divisions in the company? And how does the decisions I take today are going to affect the industry, the competitor's response? So you take everything into account. Consultants also work with a very interesting set of principles. One of them is the 80-20. I think probably most of you heard about it. So 80-20 is 20% of the effort leads to 80% of the results. So that's something empirically verifiable. If you have a huge client base, you most likely are going to generate 80% of your profits from only 20% of that client database. So when we apply this concept of 80-20 is to that, but sometimes also to the work. So we have a lot of things to do, a gigantic to-do list. What am I going to do? Well, where is the 80-20 here? Another thing is MISI. Did you hear this concept of MISI? Anyone knows what it means?
Mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive.
Almost there. The meaning is there, that we actually call it collectively exhaustive. But that's pretty much it. So it means 2 things. The first part, or let's start with the last part. Collectively exhaustive means that when you break down a problem, you're going to make sure that you cover everything, that you don't miss something. And then the mutually exclusive means that when you are breaking down into these components, they don't overlap. So for example, if we say, what are you going to do for Easter? If you want to be collectively exhaustive, you could say, I'm going to go traveling to another continent, or I'm going to go traveling to another country in the same continent, or I'm going to stay. Okay, those are pretty much what you can do, right? You cannot do anything else than this. And that is also mutually exclusive, because if you travel to a country in another continent, you're not traveling to a country in the same continent. But if you say, for example, that I'm going to travel for another continent, or I'm going to travel to another country, then you have overlap. because you can travel to a country that is in another continent. So that's a principle. Of course, this is a very basic example. When you are developing an issue tree of a serious problem, a very complex one, it's sometimes hard to uphold a complete MISI structure. And sometimes the way we get around it is we say, well, the factors affecting profitability of this client are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then sometimes we put something like others, because we don't know exactly where we can fit them. Anyway, MISI is something that we really try to follow as much as possible. And then we also have another principle: don't boil the ocean. Anyone knows what this means? So this means if you want to get salt, you shouldn't boil the entire ocean. There's other easier ways of getting it. You can mine it. So when you are in a project, you may be thinking, I want to prove that, I don't know, that this market is unattractive, we should go in. And you can start doing super complex analysis, customer base, synergies, blah, blah, blah. It never ends. Or you can do something a bit simpler, a bit faster, like me do a quick sanity check or a quick back of the envelope calculation. And you're not going to be 100% right, but at least you know if the direction is good. And another principle is called don't reinvent the wheel. Sometimes you are working for a client and you think, well, it would be good to, for example, develop a better way for the client to assess performance of their employees, like a scorecard. Most likely, someone had done it before. So you can just go there and get some examples, and then you just tweak it. And in 1 or 2 days, it's done. Instead of you spending a lot of time reinventing the wheel. The wheel was already invented. So those are some of the principles and the approaches that consultants follow. Now, if you hear a consultant speak, you cannot be wrong. The way you say that it's a consultant is when you hear something like this. A TMT CST with no whip stole the BTOGEM for a CLM LOP when I was doing my TER with the CSS. So my DGL sent me to the BAT with an APD AP. Anyone can decipher this? So this means a TMT is one industry, telecom, media, and high tech. CST means client service team. So those are the consultants that serve a specific client. With no WIP, that's work in progress. It's basically billing that the client didn't pay yet. Stole the BTO, that's a function in McKinsey called the Business Technology Office. JEM means Junior Engagement Manager. For a CLM, that's another function, Customer Lifecycle Management. LOP, that's Letter of Proposal you do to get a new project for a client. When I was doing my TER, that's my time and expense report. So you spend money when you're doing in a project, you have the expense report to get that money back, reimbursed to you. With the CSS, that's the client service staff, the personal assistants, the people that help you with the logistics. So my DGL, that's my development group leader, the person that is responsible for your personal development at the firm, sent me to the BAT, that's Business Analyst Training. It's one of the many trainings that you have in the firm, with an APD, that's Advanced Program Degree, people with PhDs, for example. AP, it's a role of McKinsey called the Social Principle. Very hard to understand these riddles, but the truth is, when you get in, you start speaking like that. It makes communication easier. Now, as a final remark for the consulting way of thinking, is that sometimes this way of thinking may have some negative effects on the interviews. Why is that? Sometimes a consultant arrives to an interview and he can be worried. So his mind is going to be diverging. It's not on purpose. It's because he's thinking about the next steer committee presentation. Or he's anxiously awaiting for an email that is very important for him. So it may be a bit hard to really pay very close attention to the candidate, especially if the candidate is not very compelling in communicating. Another thing that can happen is that he also has some bias. So sometimes, and I as an interviewer would come and would receive the CV just as I was entering the room. And then when I look at the CV, I read something on the CV and for some reason my attention is focused on, I don't know, a typo or something that is not very clear. And already in the mind of a consultant, he may be starting making a judgment and having a preconceived notion of the candidate, which may not be true. Another thing is sometimes the background expectations. If you get a candidate with a PhD in quantum mechanics, you start thinking, okay, this guy is going to be a genius in the quantitative parts. I'm going to push him a bit hard. And of course, the interview process has to be fair with everyone. So most of the times these things don't happen, but if you have 4 or 6 interviews, you may have someone interviewing you that is falling into either the worry or the bias, and you as an interviewer need to pull him back. You need to conquer him back. It's like a football match has 90 minutes. So you may start with a bit of an unlucky event, but you still have time to win him back.